I'm just looking at changing the 5D Mark I for a camera that's got two SD cards, or a compact flash and an SD. And there's a few other things going on with Sony at the moment that I like the look of the cameras. And I've noticed a lot of people are using Canon lenses on the Sony camera, so this might be a good time to try a body this year to see whether I like the Sony system and how well it works with the Canon lenses. They've brought out the A7R Mark III and they've brought out the A9, and they're just bringing out the A7iii. The A7 III is around about £2,000, $2,000. So I went out yesterday, went over to London Camera Exchange, had a look at the A7R III because they haven't got the A7 III in yet. What I'm looking at really is these smaller bodies always look a bit imbalanced to me. When you've got large lenses and a small body, it can work because the lens takes over as far as weight's concerned, and the body sort of floats there, so you can hold the body very lightly and it can work. But as you go towards, say, a 24-105 or 24-70, they can become very imbalanced and they can cause pain in your hands. So when I'm looking at these cameras, I'm not just looking at the technical specs. I know this is an amazing camera, this range of cameras. They're brilliant. They're everything you need. The engineering's very good. We'll go through the video and we'll just look at the camera and I'll tell you what I like about them. So the A7 III is a 24 megapixel sensor. So that's all you need really. There's this sweet spot everyone's talking about at 24 megapixels, and to some extent I agree. I use a Samsung that's got 21. I can definitely tell that the files are better than, say, 10 megapixel files or 13 on the 5D, 12, 13. So 24 seems to be where Canon have stuck, and I know they brought out the 5D Mark IV that's 30 megapixel, but it's this sort of area that's getting quite sensible. The technology's there, the computers that we use aren't too, not slowed down. It's this sort of technology keeping up with itself really. Everything has to be right. You've got to have the right computer, right camera, a nice quick workflow. So when they brought out the R, I thought, do I really need all those pixels? Not really. So I'm amazed they brought this camera out so quick, but what I think they're trying to do is hit this £2,000 mark, because they know at the end of the day that when Canon are at £3,500 and Nikon are at £3,500, I'm thinking the D850, the 5D Mark IV, it's just too expensive. And I do this for a living. This isn't, pretend photography. I actually go out and photograph weddings. I teach a lot of photography. But, we don't want to spend a lot of money on these bodies. For a start, we need two of them usually, so we want the same body twice, so that's £4,000 on bodies is fine, but £8,000 on a pair of A9s, well, you start to wonder why you're actually doing it for a living. I won't bore you with that, but the bottom line is, these cameras are meant to be designed for people that are working, so what's the point of having these top-end cameras unless we can afford them? So well done Sony for going 2,000. Canon have got to follow you now. They've got to get the camera right at the right price. They've caught everybody out, to be honest with you. I think there's going to be a lot of designers at these companies just thinking, what have we got to do? They've got to bring out the perfect camera. And to some extent, this Sony A7 III, there's not a fat lot wrong with it, to be honest with you. I've gone through these cameras. There is something that is going to be there that I'm going to talk about at the end of the video, and I'm waiting to see the 24-105, which you can see in the video, to see whether this overcomes this problem. I think it will. The G Master lenses have extended the distance from the body to the front of the lens, and you've got this angle. As I say, I will talk about that at the end, but let's look at everything that's brilliant about this camera. The sensor, as I've mentioned, do we really need to be talking about every pixel now? The technology's there, it's peaking, they've gone as far as they need to go with that. Brilliant files, 15 stops dynamic range, natural skin tones, 6400 ISO. When they show a picture of 6400 ISO and then they say you can go to, you know, ridiculous level 204, 800, well that's, you know, too high obviously, but you know, you can argue with that. 6400 ISO, fine for weddings, so absolutely perfect for me. The in-body stabilization 5-axis, well, that's what we want. Canon, you've just got to just put it in the cameras. Nikon, I think they've just got to follow, you know, this trend now. You can't really fight the fact that we want stabilization for every lens we own, whether it's a prime, whatever it is. We just want to put it on that camera and just go out and take the photos. And Sony have realized that, and they've made a brilliant system. Panasonic are doing that, and Olympus. So nobody wants blurry photos, and that's brilliant. Now, autofocus in these cameras we can talk about forever. I use one focus point in the center and have forever, but they're changing things. Sony have realized that people might want to start catching that eye or tracking very easily, and the eye autofocus, it'll come to in a minute. Let's just dip into 10 frames a second. 10 frames a second, for me, confetti shots, would I use 10 frames a second? Personally, no, I wouldn't. But would I use it if I had this Sony? Well, I'd probably give it a go, and I would, to be honest. So it could be well worth having a go with. The fact that it does it in silent shooting, so you're inside the ceremony and you want 10 frames a second. I don't actually want 10 photos, so I'm looking to pick out very accurately, pick out moments, produce fewer photos. So this camera probably isn't, you know, 10 frames a second is way too much for me. But for if you're in wildlife, action photography, they're doing it because they're trying to produce the perfect camera that you can literally buy one body, own it for the next 5 years, and do anything you want with it. And that's what this camera's all about, and they've hit the market. They've got it absolutely spot on. I've been in it a while, since I was 16, so it's 30 odd years now. I'm getting old, but I've seen all these different manufacturers do different things, and I only really comment when I see something big happen, and Sony have just done it. When you hit a price point and you're giving everybody everything they need in one body, you can pretty much say game over. And people will be switching over to Sony. I guarantee you're going to see Canon cameras in the windows of all the different shops flying in there over the next few weeks. I'm not saying Canon have had it. They've they've not had it at all, and I'll talk about that towards the end of this video. But Sony will have the mass market now. So let's just talk about a few other things that they've put on this camera. Now, this eye autofocus, when it's hitting focus on the eye, as long as it works and it's very accurate and it works and we can go out and do portraits, this is what we want, basically. Focus recompose on a shot like the one you're just seeing is pretty impossible, isn't it? You need some sort of tracking, bang, so it hits the eye. And this, you know, for these sort of images, it's great. That sort of image, focus recompose, no problem. So I don't know why they're really showing that. It's more the case of she's looking down, it's still tracking the eye, which is great. And I should think once you get used to eye autofocus, I mean, Jason Lanier, go and watch his videos. He's, I can highly recommend you go and watch his videos about the Sony cameras. He's a wedding photographer. He understands about equipment, and the reason is because he's shot so many weddings, and when you do weddings you need this equipment to just work day after day and second after second. You need to come back with the images, else unfortunately you're in a mess. So go and watch some of his videos about the eye autofocus with the Canon lenses. He's just done a few, well worth watching because he talks a lot of sense. Anyway, let's carry on. So the eye autofocus looks like they've got that absolutely sorted. They've got 4K HDR. The bottom line is Sony have hit the 4K. The 4K TV, everything's moving that way. That's absolutely brilliant. I'm a photographer. 4K to me, the only interest I've got in it at the moment is pulling stills from 4K, which interests me, which you'll see Panasonic are pushing more that way, and that will be a good thing. The high battery performance is essential, and this is what they had wrong and why I didn't touch the Sonys. If you're changing batteries all the time at weddings, I don't want to know, to be honest with you. I put one battery in a Canon, I do a whole wedding, or two, sorry, in the battery grip. I do a 10-hour wedding and then I go home. I do not want to be changing batteries. So they had this wrong. They got 710 shots per charge. So to me, 710, absolutely ideal. I can actually walk in without the battery grip and one battery and do most of my weddings now, no problem at all. So very good. So that has actually made the grip slightly bigger, I think. Now, I'm not a Sony photographer, and I'll need to go and look at the older version of the A7 now, because I haven't been interested in these Sonys until now. But because that grip's bigger, notice how it's getting closer to that lens. Is it physically bigger because the battery's bigger? Has it come out more? Is it protruding? I've got to have a look at that. But one thing I can say, and I'll hint at what I don't like about this camera, is the distance between your fingers and the lenses. So in other words, the actual grip is uncomfortable and gives you hand fatigue. I held it for about a quarter of an hour, I didn't like it at all. And on some of the lenses, I went through a range of the Sony lenses, the FE lenses, your fingers are getting way too close to the barrel of the lens. So if you're wearing gloves, absolute nightmare in the landscape. I don't wear gloves at weddings, but I just found I kept every now and then just touching my finger on the metal barrel of the lens, and it's not pleasant, to be honest with you. So there's got to be a downside to every camera. You're going to see these little things, but this is a big one for me. It's something I've got to look at with the new 24-105 they brought out. So I'm going to hold this video at that point. I know I started very positive and now this is negative. I am going to do a part 2 because I've got to split them up a bit. So let's leave it there and I'll come back.